today to have us Gavin Lockard of Students and Youth for New America. Welcome. How are you today?
Good. I'm great to be here, Dust. Thanks for having me.
Right on. This is the first time I had you on. Can you get us a little bit of your story, a little bit of your background, how you got into activism?
Well, sure. I'm from right here in Moline, Illinois. The you may know it as the home of John Deere, right here on the border of Illinois and Iowa, by the Mississippi River. And I grew up as a kid. Both my parents worked in the public school system, and so there wasn't anything particularly unusual, except that there were a lot of books involved, I suppose. And I basically you know, as I got older, I started to see some of the irrationality of the market system and not adequately preparing for different things. When I've had friends lose their health insurance, and it just something seemed off to me. And through basically reading and listening, I found out that a lot of people in history that had changed things were Marxists, were communists, and so I began to look into that a little bit.
Right on. That was quick, straightforward, to the point. So, what is Students and Youth for New America?
Well, Students and Youth for a New America is a national youth group and campus group that believes that the banks, factories, and industries should be controlled by the people, not for profit. And we believe overall that we need a government of action that will fight for working families, and that we need to just get rid of this overcrowded, irrational market system that is, it's the politicians are completely bribed, by certain industries. The uh, you know, war, military manufacturer, military contractors are have a total stranglehold on politics, and it's perpetually driving the country to war. And I think the American people are just sick of this. We need to actually use government for what it is originally designed for, which is just making everyone's life better.
Hold up for a second. So, you're telling me you're inspired by communist, socialist, communist, Marxist, but the name of the organization is New America. Isn't America a colonial settler state? Why would you use that term? Isn't it a little bit chauvinist?
Well, I don't deny that America. I don't deny that about America for a second, and that's true of pretty much most of the Western, most of the countries in the Western world. And I think that rather than having a saying "Make America Great Again" and going back to some sort of fictitious, idealized past, or saying America was never great, which ignores the great struggles against, the great abolitionist struggles and struggles for women's suffrage, and struggles for civil rights. And doing that, we believe that there needs to be a new America.
Right?
And you mentioned, sorry, you briefly
Go ahead.
mentioned socialism and Marxism.
Hmm.
Those are among the philosophies that guide us, but someone certainly doesn't have to be a Marxist or a communist to join SINA, Students and Youth for a New America.
Wow, good answer. What um, what is Students and Youth for New America been doing? I know we got the COVID going on. Are there meetings that people can check out? Is there a web page? What has been some kind of actions you guys have done?
Well, I can give a link in the description. We have a weekly meeting at 8 p.m. Central Time, or 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific, every week on a live stream platform that is totally open to the public. And before this whole coronavirus, we used to sometimes organize rallies and have public educational events, small things like that. We're trying to expand, but as for most organizations, COVID-19 has been a real kick in the teeth for SINA.
Wow. So maybe we can get in this a little bit. I think this isn't particularly about the organization, but I mean I've been out that way. Illinois, Iowa, and when you think of that region, you don't think of socialists or progressives. How has been your experience? With young folks out there, with folks in general, when you talk about these ideas that we should have a government of action uh, to fight for working families, um, as you said earlier, and that's it seems like you're trying to frame the message to some of your neighbors, and what has been some of your interactions with folks?
Well, you may be a little bit surprised to hear this, but Eastern Illinois, Eastern Iowa, Western Illinois, the Quad Cities, as some people would call it, actually had a socialist mayor in the 20s named Bearwald, and has had a couple of back then had a couple of elected socialists, and until a few decades ago had a very prominent CP, Communist Party USA chapter right here. Um, but the with the especially with Reaganomics and the end of the Soviet Union and the overall destruction of the left, there hasn't been too much out here, and we want to change all that. We want there to be something new that will improve our conditions and fight for a better world.
Right on. Let's see. That was quick. Yeah, you speak quickly, very to the point. Is there anything else you'd like to say about it? Anything you want to talk about?
Well, I think that I'm feeling very optimistic, and I think that the left needs to reclaim optimism and more than that, reclaim the class struggle. Go back to the old message of class against class, but make new messages for new conditions. Focus more on education. I mean, there's so many different directions we could go, frankly, Dust. But I think that one of the most important things is that we need to understand that government is an important, vital institution, and we need to use it to actually improve our lives and not you know make all government the problem. And I think we need to uh, you know change this government so that it works for people, and we need to get money out of politics so that people can be represented and can be mobilized to be involved in the politics that shape their lives.
Yeah, that does seem to be a trend amongst a lot of the youth, particularly in rural areas. Like if you can see through, like most young folks in general, don't like the Republicans, and then if you start to see through the Democratic Party, the money, the wars, the not giving, basic medical care, among other issues, a lot of people are tend to go into libertarianism. Like it's always the government. The government's always the problem. Like maybe you can speak to that trend and maybe some strategies and talking points on reaching out to young folks.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you wake up every day and turn on the tap to brush your teeth, you take for granted that your local government has, filtered and cleaned that water properly so that it's safe. And when you use the restroom, you take for granted that the sewage treatment is going to be safe. And you take for granted when you look at the clock that the standards have been put together so that everyone can be on the same time. And so there's really a lot that government does, but there's a lot that government isn't doing either that it should do. And I think that, you mentioned young people raised in conservative households, and so it can be a big deal to go from, say, Republican to Democratic. But of course, there's so many failures of the Democratic Party too. So young people don't, they don't know where to go. The Libertarian Party, it's the biggest, frankly, it's the biggest third party in this country. But really, the Libertarian Party is just like the Republicans on economic issues and the Democrats on cultural issues. So it's not a profound difference. extreme individualism or the irrationality of the so-called free market system. And so, if you want my personal opinion, I think there needs to be a constitutional amendment to publicly fund all elections and ban corporations from giving campaign contributions to candidates so that we could really get money out of politics. And I think that'd be the very first preliminary step towards a government that really represents the people. But obviously that would take that it does. There are some movements going to get that, but obviously it would take quite a bit of time. And so young people need to know that only socialism really will save America. Socialism has you may hear from older people that say to young people that are exploring radicalism, oh well, I think it's good that you protest and do demonstrations and stuff, but why do you have to be a communist? That isn't that a little too far? Well, that I mean that's a totally ignorant statement. I mean, when you look at the abolition movement, the women's suffrage movement, the civil rights movement, all of these movements were full of many, included many communists at the leadership as well as at the rank and file, as well as other ideologies. So I think that socialism and basic improvement of our country, they're not separate, they're interlinked. And that, I think, is what young people ought to know and remember.
I think I tweeted. I think I put one of my popular Facebook post was, let's see, it was socialism will make the American dream a reality. And my last guest, Fahim Hanna, local organizer from Greensboro, he made a very profound statement when he said, when you think about fighting for freedom, a revolution, that Hollywood has made us think like after the revolution, everything is destroyed, and there's some guns and some huts, and we're like, we're free. I think his response to that was, well, us being in poverty and being free from like whatever the fuck we were free from, it doesn't really challenge their power. Maybe you can get in on talking about some of the misconceptions people have about revolution and socialism, and how socialism is a force of stability, not chaos.
Well, even bourgeois publications, like I think it might have been the Atlantic, that had run an article that said the American dream is being real is being made real in China. Some very notable establishment publication it let that one slip, admitted that. And I think that whether you see right now in China, Cuba, other communist countries, or in the past, the former Soviet Union, these countries lifted millions of people out of poverty. They turned backward agrarian countries into fully electrified and educated ones. And so, for all their problems that were definitely real, it's important to remember that the gains were quite immense. And so, when people think that there's really this misconception that socialism only failed, only created chaos, but that is absolutely not true. I mean, every socialist revolution in history has brought extremely good gains to ordinary people at all levels.
Well, I think I've read that article. I've mentioned it several times. And I believe the statistic was 90% home ownership in China. Like that's incredible. I know, like, I mean, I just got into my house here, but it was hard. It was years of work of trying to save up and get your credit right and all that stuff. And I know a lot of people my age and younger, like getting a house isn't even realistic to them. Like they don't even see that anywhere in their future. And then home ownership in China, 90%. That's that's crazy, that we could that things like that are achievable.
Yeah,
So
it's staggering, and in fact, full employment and full housing are achievable in countries like that, like Cuba and Vietnam and plenty of places like that. And yeah, China, they've lifted millions of people out of poverty. They have a long way to go, but I mean, there's people in China now that are taking, well, at least before the coronavirus, they were taking nice vacations to France and Britain and the U.S. That, I mean, their grandparents were broke, illiterate peasants. So I mean, that's how much things have changed in China, and in other places. I mean, you know, Cuba is sending. Everyone should know this is sending doctors all around the world. You know, to deal with the current issue, and I think that um these kinds of things, like rights and dignity and a job for everybody, and decent housing and healthcare, are very achievable. And I think it's in the US, it's like individualism is just, it's like in our water, it just everybody believes that these things are a pipe dream, but they're not at all. You can look at lots of other countries that, in many ways don't have the same achievements that the US does, and yet can still provide basic needs for their people. So I think there's a lot more that we could be doing here in the US.
So I noticed you mentioned China and Cuba. Um, and another trend amongst the youth is Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders likes to focus on European countries. He likes to focus on, they have basic health care, things like that. Like, with all the problems associated with Cuba and China, why aren't you sticking closer to the more European, so-called democratic socialist countries?
Well, those European countries are good. I mean, they're doing, they have a decent standard of living, but the fact is that they still have depressions and recessions every couple of years because of the instability of the boom bust cycle in the capitalist system. So I mean, there are many, and unemployment is going up in those countries. So I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not quite as ideal as some people may have been led to believe, and frankly, those countries often engage in quite imperialist actions against third world countries, and some of their uh, some of their wealth is not entirely their own, frankly, and I mean, those countries being more like those countries, I think is a good start. I'm not really against that, but they still haven't solved the problem of crashes every couple of years, which Cuba and China have solved. I mean, in the infamous 2008 crash, I mean, the only huge country that didn't collapse was China, because they have a more traditional banking system that's kind of like credit unions lending to local businesses and things of that nature.
Right on. I mean that's my position. I often talk about on anti-imperialist America. I talk about how Europe is part of the imperialist bloc. Um, and it's far more inspiring what the Chinese Revolution, to come from being subjugated for hundreds of years and then rise to be the second largest economy, and then Cuba is a leader in organic agriculture. um, and I think Vietnam, their COVID response, um, was far ahead what they did in Europe.
It's incredible.
And
Yeah.
I think it gets to the motion of central planning, a powerful government that's able to hold the corporations in check. Maybe you can talk a little more about that.
Yeah, as I mentioned, in a past video somewhere, Vietnam has had, I believe its number of people who have died from the coronavirus or COVID-19 is still in the single digits. We'd have to check to verify that. Um, and China, despite being the possible location where the coronavirus originated, and having many people die of it, when you calculate the per capita, has done far better than the US in terms of saving lives and having early safety measures. And forgive me, what was your question?
I think I'm just trying to keep the conversation going. We're only 20 minutes in. Maybe I can read a few comments. If anybody watching this, either Facebook or YouTube, would like to ask a question, that would be helpful. Shout out to David Fox. It's morning in Australia. Good morning. It's a little earlier evening there in Illinois, no?
Yeah, that's
Um,
right. It's about yeah, that's a good way to put it.
that's he says it's a good point. Arctic Angel, hello. Arctic Angel, getting a house is hard even in democratic countries like Norway or Sweden. So China also has a one up there. Arctic Angel, the situation is getting worse because they're turning more to neoliberalism. I, I believe Arctic Angle sounds like he's speaking from experience. Maybe it's a European viewer. Um, Shout out to it's Let's X. Go ahead. I finally got.
Oh, nothing. I was just gonna. Arctic Angel is making a very good point. Housing is another problem that European social democratic countries have not solved, and there are many people that are homeless there, more than you'd expect. And of course it's been solved in Cuba, for example.
I like the point you mentioned earlier when I asked about, well, why even use the term America, because it's associated with genocide and now imperialism. And you talked a little bit about some more of the progressive history, revolutionary history in the United States. Um, and let me tie this into this point. So we mentioned that we're inspired by Cuba, we're inspired by China, but are we supposed to just take those procedures and implement them here? Like how does this work?
No, absolutely not. And I want to be clear. Socialism in the U.S. has to be a socialism with uniquely American characteristics. Our own situation will determine what we do, and what the people vote for is going to be what happens. And I think that ultimately, we can look to other countries for inspiration, but we are certainly not trying to create any kind of carbon copy. And I think that at the end of the day, when it comes to the term America too, I mean, that's just what our country is called. I mean, Brazil was founded on slavery and genocide, and I don't see people here trying to think of a different name for it. I mean, we have to have a term for what our country is. In theory, I'd be fine with renaming it, but I don't really see the point, frankly.
Right on. I mean, that's what it's known as. I had an interesting interview with Dr. Jose Prado, which is a Chicano professor. He visits Cuba um, and teaches. And when I asked him that question, his response, well, it applies more to me, meaning as an indigenous person, implied more to me. But I don't know, it kind of vibed out, and everyone knows that. I think, from my understanding, when I use like when I put that tweet out there about socialism will make the American dream a reality. I'm just trying to put words and phrases that the masses of people will understand. So maybe you can talk about. So is our goal to like go out to protest and see the same 10, 15 people at these left events, or are we trying to reach out to more people?
Well, of course, we're trying to reach out to more people, and it's not our goal. But any person on the left, most people are on the left are not going to um, admit to you that that is the case. Same 10 people, but of course that is what's happening on the left, and that's because we've allowed the political right to claim anti-globalism as its rallying cry, and we've abandoned real populist politics that help everybody. And the left as a whole, I think, has become too interested in language policing, and the whole thing about America is a perfect example of that. I mean, I think that the biggest, in my view, the biggest reason that people get into language policing and political correctness is because material changes can actually be made there, and it's a heck of a lot harder to actually um, make economic changes to this country and um, you know rewrite parts of the Constitution and put get a constitutional amendment, put people in office who believe in socialism, uh, you know uh, give housing to everyone. Those things are a lot more difficult and are bigger, more important goals. But language policing can be changed immediately. So I think people really want to feel that they are changing something. And so I can understand why people want to pander to that kind of a thing. And but we need to go beyond that. I mean, we need to be selling our message for what it is, which is socialism will save America. And we need full employment and a planned economy that is based on human need and equal opportunity and growth, and not on the dictates of whatever the next banker's quarterly profit report says.
Right on. Interesting comments from David Fox. Socialism is not one size fits all, and I think I think this next question we might be able to talk about. Arctic Angel says we need some form of mass mobilization. Any response to that?
I like this Arctic Angel guy. Yeah, and that's actually been the case with in every socialist revolution in history. That's been what's happened is there have been many people who previously were not political that have been mobilized to be political because the situation sort of demanded it, and the party or the vanguard leadership, whatever it was called, really deliberately also motivated people to get into their own material interests and to be part of the bigger decision making process. And so, yeah, we're not going to have socialism unless more people are unless we mobilize more people to get interested in politics. The old saying goes, your boss, your you're just not that into politics. Well, your boss is into politics, and he uses it every day to keep your wages down. It's time to get into politics.
Right on. Let's see. I guess we won't go. We're approaching 30 minutes. Um, you said that Students and Youth for a New America has weekly meetings. Maybe there's a website. I can add it to this description later. We can talk a little bit more about how people can get involved and learn from Students and Youth for a New America.
Yeah, well, you can go to our Facebook page if you search Students and Youth for New America. That may be a little bit unwieldy. You may be able to find it with Syna, Syna, or with my name, Gavin Lockard, Lockard. Um, you could also check out a think tank that we're affiliated with. That's kind of in its embryonic stages, the Center for Political Innovation. That's cpi-usa.org.
Right on. So we got our plugs in. Maybe I always like to try. I know we got Corona, we got half the people unemployed. Um, we always try to end things on a little bit of a positive note. You mentioned that you were positive, you were optimistic. Why is that?
Why am I positive and optimistic?
Yes.
Because it seems to me like every day, uh, a lot of people, especially young people, are waking up to the fact that this market system is really not as perfect as we were taught, and that we can use government to improve people's lives. I think the coronavirus, as much of a tragedy as it was, did wake people up to certain ideas like basic income or universal health care that previously people had thought were radical. So I think, day by day, people have really many people have started to wake up and see that real change comes from below, and that we need to mobilize ourselves so that we can take back our country. from the oligarchs and bankers that have really run it into the ground for profits, whether at home or abroad.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me today.